Hello, it's Alex here again. Today, I want to talk to you about another book. It's another book which, in one form, is available again at a reasonable cost. It's an exceptional book, of course, and it's a book that I consider to be the first proper photography book I ever bought, which I spotted in a almost a remainder shop in South Ken, probably in the well, it was in the late 90s, about 1997, 1998. And at the time, I was kind of out of photography, wondering how I could continue in it, and had sort of taken work, in the food world, so completely out of photography for a bit because I was completely lost. And then I walked past this bookshop, and I was with Sophie, my wife to be at the time, and we went in, and I found this book, and at first glance, it really is not prepossessing, but it completely, there was something about it that captivated me, and it continued to captivate me. Even the name of the photographer had a sort of mystery to it that I found seductive. But the photographs in it were the main thing, and the simplicity of it. And to this day, I don't really know if it's possible to say why I love this book so much then, and I got it immediately. Um, and it would be a long time before I really discovered what went on behind it, and who made it. I mean, I knew the name, but I knew nothing about the person who made it, who seemed to have published nothing else, and there wasn't any information around about him. Anyway, that book is Ideal Home by John R.J. Taylor. And it is in my top 10, if not top five, favorite books of all time. It's a softback, and the original is a softback. And the reason that I am sort of nominating it as for one of these series is because it's been republished quite recently, and I'll talk about that in a minute, in by Dowie Lewis, who published the original one as Corner House Publications. So that's the so this was the original, and then in about 3 years ago it was republished, and this is harder. The original is harder to get hold of, but it is. I just want to show you something quickly while I'm here. But the rain is going down. I can't believe how this is a real summer shower. Isn't that beautiful? And it's gone. So, sorry about that. Just a little diversion. Um, anyway, so what I thought I'd do is, instead of, I wrote an article about it because I was so into the book, and then I started doing a series for Black and White magazine where I wrote about important British documentary photography books. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to read the essay that I wrote originally for Black and White photography, but then was published as a forward in the new edition. And so what I'll try and do is read it in as engaging a way as possible. I feel like at the time I distilled quite a lot of the research that I did, um, and then I'll come back and I'll talk to you about how I came to write the forward and how the new edition came about. Okay, so anyway, this is from the new edition, and which is beautifully printed. And I'll come back and give a quick run through of both books when I'm finished doing this. So at least you get the facts and so on out of the way first. So settle down, and if you're comfortable, I'll begin. Ideal Home, John Taylor. He's actually John R.J. Taylor, and has been published, and that's how he goes by. But let's call him John Taylor for this. John Taylor's Ideal Home. John Taylor's influential book of photographs made in his sister's suburban North London home established that photographic examination of the domestic quotidian and the banal can reveal the hidden wonders of the fragmented, multifaceted world we take for granted, a world so abundant and rich that these things appear at first glance to have no value. Secrets hiding in plain sight. And just as a note, that's one sentence. And I think if I was writing that again, I think I'd break that up. But anyway, um, referring to the photograph Sunday Afternoon on the back cover of the 1989 edition, okay, there you see it. Okay, if you can see, that's a view into the down into the back garden of the North London semi that his sister lived in. Um, Referring to the photograph Sunday Afternoon on the back cover of the 1989 first edition, Mark Hayworth Booth, then curator of photography at the V&A, remarks that ordinary life goes on, and goes on being ordinary and unrepeatable and unique, which is a brilliant way of describing the utter banality, but the specialness of every moment in our lives in a way that we overlook. Because we're so used to it. We can't see the wood for the trees, and that's okay. That's what I love about this book. Taylor was born in Buckie in the northeast of Scotland in 1958. His father was a local photojournalist who Taylor says had no creative axe to grind. But Taylor had a propensity to draw, and in 1976 entered Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art, Dundee, to study painting. How many notable, I mean, this is an aside, how many notable photographers started off as painters? There should be actually a sort of book on that because there is a real correlation. Um, and t- uh, his father died during his first year, and Taylor subsequently inherited his father's Rolleiflex. Taylor recalls a freezing bright day that winter when he was expected to paint in the college's studio. Unable to abandon such rare sunlight, he took his father's Rolleiflex on into the streets of Dundee. For Taylor, this was the moment of truth. Walking around with a camera, meeting people, engaging and experiencing life away from the studio made more sense to him than pursuing the static internal still life of the painter. With the encouragement of his tutor, the leading Scottish humanist photographer Joseph Mackenzie, Taylor continued to photograph during his degree course and, on completion, uh, applied to the Royal College of Art in London to do a master's in fine art and photography. Believing that he should now be making work that was sophisticated, Taylor attempted to make images in the vein of photographers such as Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, and William Klein. However, the more he adapted to this style of picture making, the emptier he found his work to be. Taylor recounts how he became disconsolate, having lost his creative thread and on the verge of leaving the RCA. One day he found himself in the college's library looking at a book of Walker Evans images. In this work, Taylor recognized a quiet and objective beauty, a simplicity of vision that was diametrically opposed to that of the trio who had been his guiding creative mentors to date. Concurrently, Taylor found inspiration in the images of the new photographers such as Robert Adams and Lewis Boltz, to name just two, whose photographic documents celebrated the bland. These people are dealing with even more banal subject matter, and I'm finding it even more exciting, recalls Taylor. Evans, Boltz, and Adams' photography showed that exploration of the quotidian could reveal an aesthetic quality so often overlooked. Searching for a theme to encapsulate his new direction, Taylor recalled his first visit to London at the age of 14. He remembered the dystopian nightmare of driving along the North Circular, house after house after house, whoosh, 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 he recalls. By this time, the early 1980s, Taylor's sister Brenda had settled in a suburban semi-detached house in Southgate, a suburb of North London, skimmed by the North Circular itself. His plan was to exploit his sister's goodwill, as Hayworth Booth puts it, with the impunity of a blood relation, and photograph every aspect of this suburban house, examining every angle and detail as objectively as possible. For this project, Taylor rejected the use of a large format camera, believing that 35mm would allow him to point his lens into every nook and cranny. But he wanted the images he wanted the images to have the tonality and resolution of the larger format. During his time at the RCA, like many of his cohort, he had been drawn to Goldfinger, a photography shop in Muswell Hill, owned by the inspirational photographic chemist and teacher Peter Goldfield. Taylor and his RCA peers would make regular pilgrimages to this establishment. Here, Taylor learned to use Kodak technical pan film with Technodol developer, which, when used together precisely, and it had to be absolutely precisely, and John explained how precise the timing and so on. You could, for example, you could only process one roll of film at a time. Uh, when used together precisely, would enable 35mm film to replicate the quality of its much larger counterpart with almost grain-free continuous tone. Anybody who looks at the images in the book will wonder at the extraordinary technical quality Taylor achieved. And for the record, he used a Leica with a 35mm lens and an Olympus OM2N with 28mm and 50mm lenses. In addition to the influence of Adams, Boltz et al., his choice of visual approach was inspired by an exquisite large format photograph of foliage by an anonymous photographer that Taylor found in a magazine in the RCA library. This photograph is presented in, Taylor recalls, there was a caption to the image which Taylor reads to me from his notebook. This photograph is presented in such a direct and unpretentious manner, one forgets for a while that a photographer was involved in making it. And I think that's this is a side note, I think that's a really interesting observation about some photography, in that sometimes it's, 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 the best images don't look like they were taken by anybody. They just look like they appeared, they were made, but they weren't made intentionally. And I think that is what John was getting at, and it's something that I've thought about a lot, about that, almost as if the camera is floating free of the photographer and just happens to be sitting above their shoulder or something like that. And so, and I think this was the quality that I think I was drawn to in the pictures without knowing it at the time. Um, Taylor saw this method of high resolution reproduction together with a purely objective documentary style as a way of removing the author from the image and allowing the viewer to be free to experience the curious mystery evoked by high resolution images, the viewer themselves unfettered by obligation to the work's master creator. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that it's just about the image. And I think that so many photographers have tried to encapsulate this. I would say, we've got photographers who just want to know how a camera works, what things uh, look like when they're photographed, and so on. So it's a whole vein of photographic inquiry that is fascinating, and yeah, I mean, I could go on about, and I will go on about it in other posts. To be honest, that early '80s summer, he methodically worked his way round his sister's house, documenting the rooms, ornaments, interiors of fridges, cupboards, garden, as many aspects of the domestic interior as of the home as possible. At times, the strangeness of his project would unsettle him. Taylor understood that success hinged on his ability to maintain an objective view. However, the tension between the objective documentary project and the very subjective nature of photographing his older sister's home was at times overwhelming. And you can imagine why. I mean, on the one hand, he's trying not to be judgmental. It's just meant to be it's just meant to be how a house looks. But at the same time, it's very hard for you, the photographer, who's a human being and is related to the house's owner, to retain that sort of distance or that objectivity, at least that emotional objectivity and that lack of judgment. Art is not objective. A work of art is an artifact of the subjective consciousness of the artist. Taylor was attempting to document a home objectively, and at the same time, he understood that the subjective or artistic value he desired would be conferred on it not by him, but through the attention of the work's viewers. You know, so this is the thing I've talked about so many times, the psychological perspective. It's like you've got the three things. The uh, you've got the photographer, you've got the subject, and you've got the viewer. And here, uh, John is conferring on the viewer the final not obligation, responsibility for creating or rendering the value of the image. And this is really important. And he was trying to make a kind of photography that did not get in the way of that process or that event when the image materializes in the mind of the viewer without mediation en route. Um, so yeah, so um, to so to attempt this project in the home of a close family member inevitably led to a tension between the photographer and his subject matter, a dynamic tension between the objective demands imposed by Taylor and the subjective reality of photographing a close family member's domestic interior and the inevitable display of his sister's aesthetic and personal inclinations. The locus of beauty found in the images of this book is founded on this tension. That is my belief, and I mean that's a it's an argument I'm making. Having completed the photography, Taylor entered and won a Greater London Arts photography competition, of which Mark Hayworth Booth, remember who was at the time the curator of photography at the V&A, was a judge. Hayworth Booth wanted to purchase a print for the V&A's collection. At the same time, Taylor had been in touch with the photo book publisher Dowie Lewis, then director of Corner House, Manchester. And just to triangulate this properly, the introduction to Dowie Lewis was made by Peter Turner, who was the editor of Creative Camera magazine, which is if you give me 2 seconds, I'll show you what that looked like. And I just happen to have a copy here. I should have been prepared with it already. So this was a so if you don't Creative Camera is often cited as giving the start to so many photographers' careers, and it was beautifully published, I must say. Shame that it's gone. Let me just so Peter Turner, made the introduction to Dowie Lewis. Taylor arranged to meet both Dowie Lewis and Hayworth Booth at the V&A print room in 1987 to show both of them the set of prints that would later become Ideal Home. Charles Newton, who was a curator of design, prints, and drawings at the museum, was also there. The result of this meeting was that the V&A acquired the entire set, and Lewis offered Taylor a publishing deal on the spot. That was quite a day, if you like, in the life of a photographer, to have your entire collection. And the prints that John made are stunning. And one day I hope to show them. So there is a process going on there, but his printing is just delightful. It's beautiful and exquisite. Um, Before publication, though, Newton, who was working with Howard Booth, visited Taylor's sister to record her comments on the photographs. And I'll pick this up in a minute. These comments form the captions of the photographs and provide a commentary on the scenes and objects depicted. Today, Ideal Home has achieved the status of modern classic. Every serious photo book collector prizes a copy, and students are taught from the warm pages of the university copy. Documentary photography in the UK has been set on an altered course by this small volume, extended for the new edition. Charles Newton wrote in the foreword to the book, "Everything is potentially loaded with meaning, if only now and then we took the time to look in a different way. Ordinary things, even the banal, are potentially extraordinary." Or, as the Austrian poet and novelist Rilke wrote, "When your daily life seems barren, do not blame it, blame yourself rather, and tell yourself that you are not poet enough to call forth its riches." So that I wrote in 2022, um, which then went on to cover, to accompany the re-edition of this. And so, if we look at some of the pictures, okay, so this is um, John looking into his sister's closet and so on. And I'll just read the comment that Brenda made to this picture. Um, I've recently given those away. These shoes on the left, they're bright red. Those I bought for John and Katrina's wedding. I still like them. These got ruined on a holiday. They were my aerobic shoes. I've still got this white bag, which was made for me by a lady in Covent Garden. So when I was out and about with Olivia, everything was in the bag. There's nothing like putting a pair of new shoes on. It's a nice feeling. Um, as you can see, the text is on the left. There's a the caption is there. They're pretty perfunctory captions: bathroom, wash hand basin, bath, and windowsill. I just want to run forward to that's a particular favorite of mine. And she writes, they were just going out. Illegal tender. I started to save every pound note, and I've still got that jug. It moves about. There- There's a total simplicity to this. Now, I as a sort of side note, and my personal sort of you know f- connection with the book and the work since um, I got to know John, I eventually got in touch with him, and what had happened to him, and I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning this, was that following the publication, and I mean, and this was a real hit when it came out, and it won as I wrote, it won awards. And in fact, even people from TV companies were beginning to do sort of reality TV type things, and they wanted John to be involved in producing, things. So suddenly his world had gone from time, from time, from this sort of insecure, um, you know, in world of the solitary photographer trying to make his way to being actually something of a star, collected by the V&A, published by Corner House, um, and was well on his way when he had a nervous breakdown, and from which he never fully recovered, is the truth. And he continues to photograph, but he photographed, and he he wasn't able to engage in the sort of business of a career of photography in the way that he should have been able to do, but cursed by the worst kind of mental illness. He languished, and eventually I got in touch with him and went to visit him, and he lives not far. I mean, amazing, he lives in a house not dissimilar to the one he photographed here in North London, near Southgate, and we got to know each other, and he is the most delightful human being. He's a generous, warm Scottish man, who lives in London, and has done since the RCA days, I suppose. And he has he has continued to photograph. He has a website and so on, and so we've had a very long conversation about working together, and I'm hoping that one day we will, because we've become friends. Um, and uh, and and his talent and his way of seeing is evident in all the work he does. He's a true artist, and he's an artist in the sense that you sense in every single picture that he makes that um, he's creating a world that only he could create. He has an original voice, and so I'm hoping that one day we'll get a chance to work together. as I said, I mentioned earlier, he has a. Um, I've seen the original prints he made uh, of and yeah, of his ideal home images, and they are really, really beautiful, and they're in beautiful condition given their age. You know, that he did them right, framed them right. They're there waiting to be seen someday. So I'm you know, holding out that one day we'll do something together. But it's complicated, and he's a lovely guy. And really, I consider him a friend now, and it's my honor to know him. It's a privilege to have sat down and talked to him, and we share a lot of the same sort of uh, in you know instincts. And I think I'm going to finish by sort of talking about where I think John's sits in the sort of in the what we call the legacy or the canon of photography. And I think what he did was, there's Gary Winogrand, okay, said something like, I photograph because I want to see how something looks when it's photographed. And that is a sort of as perfect a sort of way of saying, I want the thing not to be a reflection of reality. That my images are not a reflection of reality. They are a photographic rendition of of the world, but their value is as a photograph, not as how much they look like the world, how much they look like the thing that I was photographing, how faithful they are to it, which is the curse of photography because it's often compared to reality. What these photographers like John R.J. Taylor and the new topographics understood was that photography, just photographing something, was enough because it transformed it. It was kind of an alchemy. It took it away from its reality, and made it photographic, literally photographic. So it sits as a picture in hand. I know, like Jeff Batchen has written about this. It's about the materiality of the image. It separates it from the uh, from the world. The image is everything, and that is the one way to look at photography. In fact, I think it's the way to look at photography. And once you tune into photography as a medium, not as that reflects the world, that takes the world and renders it into a photograph, and that the photograph is the only thing, and that is the universe, then you've got this sort of perfect world that you can get lost in, and that the where which allows for that triangulation of photographer, subject, and viewer, and a sort of freedom and a universe within every image. And I think that's what John R.J. Taylor achieved when he made when he made Ideal Home, and then it was republished long ago. So you can get this now. Um, okay, that's enough from me. I hope you've enjoyed this, and please comment or reach out to me in any way you like. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.